This episode today is brought to you by my chair, because you can hear it throughout the video. Sorry about it. Hello, this is Surf, and we're back with another Meta Thoughts. Last episode we talked about late-stage wrath theory. If you're seeing this one, you probably remember. You remember all those great points I was making. We're doing another one here today, so like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll get more of these out lickety-split. Just for you. Just for you. No one else. We don't have to talk about anybody else. I'm making these for you right now. Said to you, we're going to dive right on in. This episode, we're going to be talking about why democracies don't work, or at the least why democracies are hard mode. The representative and democratic forms of government really don't seem to work on Arathnear or Eldham. When push comes to shove, the representative forms of government are usually the first to crumble in the face of overwhelming pressure. And just like the last video, I have divided this into 3 parts. When we're dealing with democracies, the issues inside the democracy, the outside issues, the issues that the people outside of the nation will see and critique about the country in question, and meta issues, things that don't fit those 2 categories are sort of straddle the line between them. So inside issues, outside issues, and meta issues. Are you ready? Are you ready? I'm excited. I'm very excited. Let's get in it. When I was writing the sort of script for this, the first thing that came to mind was the constant leveraging for power that democracies in Stoneworks will have, and that comes in the form of political parties and just people trying to represent themselves in pursuit of power. And sort of what this turns into is a sort of popularity contest with all of the people in the nation. You'll have people with long and storied histories, perhaps, who think they can bring something to the nation, and all of them who are gaining office are going to think this. However, once the election starts, once it becomes relevant of who's getting power and who isn't, things start getting a little nasty. People start forming sides. People will, mudsling to the other party. You know democracies. You probably live in one if you're listening to this. You know how it can be. And so people get really factional really, really quickly. And when things get factional really, really quickly, when one side ends up winning and the other side doesn't, that can resort in violence pretty quickly. You could go from you could get some civil unrest in a democracy very, very quickly, Like, people usually, because they think they can change things, because it's a democracy, usually think if they just try hard enough, their people will get into power, and the other people won't be able to complete their agenda or whatever. So people are more confident doing violence than they would be in like a kingdom if the person they didn't want becomes a governor of a province or whatever, just for example. So you could start seeing that when your side doesn't win. And on top of that, even if it doesn't result in a civil war, that doesn't mean the other side that didn't win the election isn't going to be prone to trying to mess up the whole agenda for the winning party. You can have protests. You can have, once the other party gets into power, the losing party can maybe not contribute materials or not commit men to a conflict that the party has found itself in. The current ruling establishment has found itself in. Say if there's a crisis and you're either declaring war on somebody or someone's declaring war on you, that competing party might not be inclined to send men your way if that's the case. And losing a war Knowing Eldham and Rathnir, losing just a single war can cost your nation absolutely everything. So having these multiple parties not being friends with each other can almost be a death sentence in that way. That was the inside issues. Now let's look at issues that you could perceive from a democracy if in Eldham you weren't living under a democracy. Say you're living under a kingdom or an empire, or the leader of a kingdom or an empire. What would you see by looking at a republic or a democracy? And what you'd be able to see is they're visibly divided with their party system or whatever else they have. It's pretty easy to see who you can sort of pick on to get your way. If you wanted to cause instability, or if you wanted to put a nation in your sphere of influence before bringing them into the fold completely, you kind of know who the enemies of the ruling party are just by getting into the Discord and reading like the general description of the nation, if they have one. On top of that, since all of these politicians, I guess we could call them, in a democratic nation in Eldham want power, all of them want power for themselves and to not give it to them. They want to win. They want to win. That's the simplest way to put it. Therefore, that makes them prone to corruption in a fantasy setting like where we are in Eldham. If a stronger nation wanted to curry favor, they could just talk to the rival party and say, hey, or they could talk to the ruling party and say, if you want to stay in power, if the ruling party wants to stay in power, we could work with you. We could get some things done together, and in turn, we bring you in a little closer. That way, the ruling party in that democracy stays in power. And that's sort of how a lot of nations sort of get trapped like that. On top of that, whether you're dealing with a two-party nation or a multi-party nation, all of them are looking for different things, and none of them are communicating. They're competitors. They're competing each other. They want power. They're looking for power. And so that means you have two or more guys going out, trying to make connections, trying to make deals, doing their thing. And that could come into conflict. Like if one leader starts talking to, let's throw out a nation in Eldham, Ravengard, and another one starts talking to Drukyal or ETC or whatever. You're starting to get conflicts of interest for nations that might not like each other. You're bringing in all these nations from all different sides. And it has the potential to really divide people when you have to draw lines in the sand. And nations, these bigger nations, are coming to these democracies and wondering where the hell their agreements are at, where their agreements are going. And you're not dealing with the leaders of the nations. Maybe you're not dealing with the leaders of the nations. Maybe you're just trying to curry favor with a party, a political party within the nation. And things can get really, really mucky. Things can get less than clear very quickly when two or more people are trying to make their own schemes at the same time. Lastly, for the outside issues portion, a democracy or a republic can be very slow to react when it comes to a crisis, and that's true for in real life as well. Making sure everyone has a say is time-consuming, and when it comes to a peak of crisis where you need to act quickly, they're not always the best at that. And for Stoneworks nations, for a democracy, crises are massive. They're even worse than they would be for a more authoritarian government. And that's because people are going to be divided. Say a stronger nation who's like a dictatorship or a kingdom or an empire puts an ultimatum to a democracy or republic and says join or die or something. Some people are going to want to resist, and some people are going to want to give in. That's just sort of the nature of things. And you'll have a lot of sympathizers in that case. Or you'll have, like, pretty much guaranteed more than zero sympathizers. If you had a king, you'd just be say, "No, forget you. We're forming an alliance. We're forming a coalition." But if you're got a democracy, there's much, much more likely of a chance that a small portion or a large portion of your population will be fleeing to that power, that stronger authoritarian power, for safety, for support, so they don't get all their stuff looted, etc., for any number of reasons. Also, members of a democracy that intend on betraying their nation for power in the event that a stronger nation comes in. Like a citizen of a town might want to become the owner of the town, or the governor of the whole territory that this authoritarian nation is conquering. So it's something you've really got to watch out for when you've got a more representative government. Before we move on to our last category of meta issues, I'd like to provide a small grouping of nations, democratic nations, representative forms of government, who have suffered coups and are either still living or no longer living. First of which is Modena, who had a monarchist coup on July 20th, which was successful, and immediately merged with more powerful monarchists, that being the Razuni Sultanate. Second, we have Garxios on the 19th of July, which failed, presumably after one of their citizens didn't win an election, tried to start a coup, and it blew up in his face. Next one, we have Breznikia, which had a failed coup, and then immediately after that failed coup, merged with Frostmere. Next, we have Batu on the 11th of July, coup committed by Bardonia to take control of this Eldham nation in their partner continent. This was successful, but was it ever really going to fail? I mean, if you looked at who's the leadership of ETC, the Eldham Trade Company, and who was the leader of Batu before it was couped, they were basically the same people, more or less. There are a lot of familiar faces in the ETC that were leadership in Batu. Lastly, we have the Plagatian Empire, who back in March of 2021 started out as a federal state, but after their first crisis, or just a crisis in general, they all came together and decided that it was a much safer idea to form the Plagatian Empire. And so the coup attempt wasn't successful. Their crisis didn't result in fruit for the ones that were coupping, but it did result in the leaders of that democratic nation just deciding that democracy was not the way to go, and formed an empire. Lastly, but not leastly, we have the meta issues, of which there are two, starting with the first one, rampant treason in search of power. I've already touched on this one a little bit, but I think it just seems obvious from all angles that people are willing to sell out their nation, particularly a democracy where they have more of a voice than they otherwise would have, to a more powerful power, or domestic insurrection in search of that same power. I feel like that happens pretty much whenever there's a democracy. I feel like if you run a democracy, you're putting that kind of stuff down, like at least like once a week or something. Secondly, authoritarianism in Stoneworks is just easy mode. All the power is centralized. The guy who's at the top gives it to whoever he wants, whoever he trusts, and the power just trickles down just like that. You don't have to worry. You never have to worry about if the people aren't in power are betraying you nearly as much as if you had a representative form of government. And you make all the rules. If you're on top of that authoritarian regime, you're making all the rules. You're the one talking to everybody. You're writing the announcements. You're making the plays. You don't have to rely on anyone for anything. And no one else is doing anything, really, like outside of the nation. So all your communication is crisp. It's clear. Nothing's going on behind your back that you won't find about later, unless it's like something wild. All of the foreign policy is coming through you. It's going through your office. And so you never have to worry about it as much as a representative form of government who's always got to worry about what their rivals are doing. There's no... Also, it's very easy to put down protests or revolts or whatever, because if you have a representative form of democracy or republic, we have a representative form of government in general, people can phrase their protests or their revolts as an expression of the speech they've been guaranteed, or whatever your constitution allows. People can make wiggle room within constitutions to get out the criticisms that they have and gather support and do whatever. You don't have to worry about that with an authoritarian regime. You can just put it down. You can just say this isn't allowed and kill people if you have to, or exile people most likely if they're causing too much trouble. But no, if you're in a representative form of government, they'll try to justify it. They'll try to say this is warranted and this is what democracy are about, and they're true. But it can also lead to the death of your nation if it gets bad enough. And that's all I got for you today. Tell me what you think about Democracies and Stoneworks. Do you like them? Do you not like them? Do you agree with me? Do you have more to add? Do you think what I just said was kind of bullshit? I want to know. I want to know what you think. So, like the video, subscribe to the video, or subscribe to me. Subscribe to me, not the video, just me. Like the video, favorite, do everything you're supposed to do. I'm losing my train of thought, and I'm going to end it right here. So thank you very, very much.